Hey guys, welcome back to Recursive Brew. My name is Azriel, and today, boys, I'm bringing you something a little bit different. Today, we are checking out some Monster Hunter Wilds, and more specifically, checking out the Lance in Monster Hunter Wilds. I'm going to be giving my thoughts on some of the changes to it, as well as my experience with using it to hunt a variety of monsters, mostly focusing on 8 stars with a little bit of the smaller ones in there as well. And then maybe jumping into a few other topics as well as we go through this. So, if you guys end up liking the video, please remember to give it a like, as it is hugely impactful for a small and growing channel like ours, and I hope you guys enjoy. Now, for a quick bit of context, I have really never been a Lance user. I've definitely checked it out in all of the Monster Hunter games. I always do kind of my rounds through each weapon, doing about a dozen or so hunts just to get like an idea of how to use them, so when I'm playing alongside them, like I can kind of know what I'm doing, where I should be, how to position, and yada yada. But again, never really been a big Lance user. Primarily, I've focused on the hammer, the insect glaive, and the bow. I started off back in Monster Hunter Freedom using the hammer. It just felt nice having this big old piece of metal just smacking monsters in the face. Eventually jumping into the bow when the White Fatalis runs in Monster Hunter Freedom Unite started to come out. You could position yourself in certain spots and get like no-hit runs and just farm the hell out of him. It was such a good time. I mean, if you guys want some really interesting videos, definitely go check out MHFU Bow White Fatalis. Throw that into YouTube and just have a good time. You'll know you're watching the right video when you have Requiem of a Dream playing in the background. That is like the big giveaway. And then eventually jumping into the Insect Glaive as that weapon came out. But that's mainly been me up until Wilds. I again, like I said, I was just doing my rounds, kind of going through each weapon, eventually making my way to the Lance, and man, I just have not turned back since. This weapon feels so much fun and so rewarding to play. But with that in mind, let's jump into some of those changes so I can kind of explain with a little bit more context as to why it feels so damn rewarding to use. Now, Wilds did introduce a slew of changes to the Lance, most of which I'm not necessarily going to get super deeply analytical about. I won't be diving into frame data and min-maxing DPS and things like that. I'm really just going to focus on a handful of changes that feel ever present in every single hunt that I walk into. Now, the most notable change right off the bat is the combo finishers that you get after a triple thrust combo. On the 4th thrust, you get the option of either doing an additional, like, I think it's 2 thrusts that in quick succession right afterwards that then kind of reset your animation and you can start the combo back up again. You can block whatever works for you. Or after those initial 3 thrusts, you can then jump into a counter thrust. And this is like your bread and butter when it comes to hunting. It's not too often where it's just kind of like a one-on-one with you and the monster, where you actually get the opportunity to get not only the first initial 3 thrusts in and then an additional finisher thrust, because that honestly, like, it takes quite a bit. Typically, you're gonna have to get into counter thrust to counter what's going to be coming at you, what the monster intends to do, since again, those animations take a little while longer. Man, does it feel really good to use when not only you're able to kind of like block anything that comes your way, but then also build up the charge on that counter thrust and get off, the maximum amount of attacks and damage that you can do with it. Now, there are a couple different types of counter attacks as well that the Lance gets, but this definitely feels like the most natural to kind of jump into. You do also get perfect blocks where as soon as you get hit, I don't know if it's exactly the same frame or damn near close to the same frame, where if you block that attack, you can then come back at him with either smacking your shield or following it up with a hit with your Lance. All of those things feel really good to use, and honestly makes the hunts super engaging because you're always hunting, or rather you're always trying to get in that perfect guard to make sure you're getting rid of 0 damage, because chip damage is honestly oftentimes the sort of the run killer when it comes to a Lance, just because you can kind of rack that up pretty damn quick, because most attacks kind of at least do a little bit of something to you. But that's something I plan on getting into a little bit later when we get into like the individual monsters and kind of how those feel to hunt. Because Gore Magala in particular, that guy hurts. He does a lot of damn chip damage. But then getting into some of the movement during attacks via the focus mode, again, something new to Wilds. But this kind of allows for minor repositioning in the middle of your combos, so you can hit once, do a little jump to the left, little jump to the right, back or forward, and then do that in between each individual hit. That feels super good to do, at least from my experience. I'm not trying to be like dead on with the monster. I'm always going to try to be a little bit to the left or to the right of their head, and you always want to kind of keep that, I guess you can kind of consider like a bit of a cadence with the monster all throughout the hunt, where you're just kind of off center just a little bit, as that repositioning via the focus mode really allows you to do. It's honestly a lot of fun. I love it with pretty much every single weapon in the game. I think it's like, really awesome inclusion. Now, Lance users do get access to a variety of other moves like the high thrust, the leaping thrust, the wide sweeps, and a couple of others as well. But to be honest, so much of those are very hyper situational that it really never feels all that useful to actually do. And I don't even think that that's like, I know I said earlier I'm not going to get super into the DPS aspect of it, but I definitely think that the most DPS is just doing mid thrust over and over and over again and combo finishing with that, to the point where like a leaping thrust, a wide sweep kind of becomes a little less useful. I think really the only time you probably want to use that is if they're sleeping, doing like a wide sweep or something like that. But yeah, I mean, most other attacks from the Lance are hyper situational. But in spite of that, kind of leading me to my last point, is that, man, is it gratifying getting greedy with your attacks when it comes to a Lance. Being able to weave in those unnecessary attacks. Again, they're unnecessary, but they're kind of fun to use and they look cool. And it's a nice way to try to, change up the pace of things, right? Like if you're not trying to go for the absolute quickest hunts, you probably want to weave in a couple attacks just for the hell of it to have a little bit of fun. And the Lance really allows for that. Man, it feels really good being rewarded with your positioning, especially when you're fighting something like in Arkfeld, where the hitboxes on it, they're like a little too honest a lot of the time. But again, your positioning is very much rewarded with a hunt like that, because you can get off these additional attacks that you otherwise probably wouldn't use. But again, like if you take the time, you learn those fights, you figure out exactly where you need to be. There's this intense level of gratification that comes as a consequence of that. And I think that plus being able to do like perfect guards and things like that is what really drew me into the weapon. Now, before we get into the next section, I wanted to quickly highlight that on the screen right now, you'll see the build that I've been using in all the clips thus far and in all the clips to come. It's nothing super crazy. It's nothing super min-max or anything like that. It's decent, but it gets the job done, and that's really all that matters in the end. And I think I can hunt pretty damn well with it. Now, one other thing I wanted to hit on too, as you guys can see, I think maybe one clip in here has some HUD. There might be a clip or two with my Palico, and I think one with another hunter that joined my hunt. But for the most part, there's no HUD, right? It's just me, the monster, and like my intuition. And I gotta be honest, this is such a fun way to play the game. It feels so like thrilling getting into a hunt and just really having to feel out everything that happens when it comes to chip damage, when it comes to the monsters, or when it comes to the hits that the monsters do to you, right? Just having to be like ever present in the moment and keeping in mind like, okay, cool, if it hits me with this, I know how much damage that is. Maybe I should back off and heal. Maybe I can continue engaging with it, gauging how much stamina you have and things like that too. Man, it's super thrilling. I would very much advise anybody who wants a little bit more of a challenge, because this game is kind of easy. But if you want a little bit more of a challenge, definitely give this a shot. It is a unique experience. Now, as a Lance user, I kind of like to divide monsters up into two different categories. And again, this is specific to Lance, although you could probably argue that this would apply to some other weapons as well. But this is really just sort of where my head goes when I think about how I need to approach a fight. And again, it kind of falls into two categories. And those two categories being mobile monsters and stationary monsters. And to kind of give you an example of what I mean for both, when it comes to mobile, I'm thinking monsters like Raidao, Gormagala, Azuwu, Rathalos, Mitsuzun, and probably a few others as well. More often than not in these fights, I'm not necessarily getting the opportunity to like directly engage with the monster all throughout the fight very consistently, or at least as consistent as some of the stationary monsters that I'll get to in a moment. Something like a Raidao, it's constantly flying around, dragging its wing on the ground or zapping you mid-air. A Gormagala is jumping around, unleashing like these giant bursts of dark energy or whatever it happens to be, and then jumping around some more. It likes to jump around. It's a jumpy guy. Something like a Azuwu as well, where it's throwing itself at you and past you, very consistently doing that, engaging with you from a long distance, which I gotta admit, I love that aspect of this monster. It being able to stretch its arms out and hit you from afar and staying afar, not feeling, inclined to get up close. It does sometimes, but for the most part, it's comfortable with that distance, and I love that. I think that's so cool. And then we get into some of the more chaotic and difficult fights. I'm going to start with Mitsuzun, because Rathalos is one of my favorites, and I could talk all day about it, but let's get Mitsuzun out of the way. This is a tough fight. I'm not gonna lie. Mitsuzun gives me a really hard time. It's basically constantly on its Fast and the Furious shit, just drifting around me on its bubbles, shooting bubbles at me that I gotta deal with, hitting me with laser beams, throwing its ass at me. Like, there's just a lot going on in the fight. And oftentimes, it's getting in, doing its damage. It gives you a little bit of an opening, and then it breaks away from you, and then repeats. And it's a constant back and forth like that. It's not necessarily where a lance excels, because a lance, again, it's going to want to just stay in your face and attack repeatedly and block and things like that. When you have monsters that are good at disengaging and are comfortable with putting range between you and them, or keeping you at bay, it makes the lance user's life a little bit more difficult. Again, these are fun challenges. I'm not saying that these fights are bad. They're bad design. They're, you shouldn't be using a lance against them. They just offer more, they're more difficult. And in this particular way, when it comes to the distance that it's able to create between you and it. Now, Rathalos. This is probably my favorite fight, top 2 favorite fights. I would say Arkfeld's up there as well, but Rathalos is probably one of my favorite monsters to fight in the game as a lance user, because it's just such a chaotic fight. He's constantly flying around doing all sorts of attacks. He's getting like 4 or 5 hits in at a time that you have to consistently block and dodge out of the way of before he gives you an opportunity to engage with him. And then in addition to that, he makes such good use of Lance's high thrust, where if he's like flying in there and kind of floating, you can high thrust him however many times until he gets like staggered midair. And if you keep at it, you'll eventually knock him down. And I just love that. Like, what a unique fight that is. It's like along the lines of when you fight Gypceros, where if you hit its head so many times, you end up breaking the bulb on its head and it can't flash you anymore. When you're fighting like a new Udra, and if you cut off enough tentacles, his attacks become just a hell of a lot weaker because they have such shorter range on them. Again, this is another one of those sort of unique fights, and it's a really challenging one, to be completely honest with you. It definitely pushes you to the limit in terms of when you feel like you've kind of perfected your craft, you want to go fight one of these. He doesn't hit super hard, to be quite honest, just because his stars are pretty low. I think it caps out at like a 6 star or something like that. So he's not the strongest monster out there, but it is a constantly engaging fight nonetheless, and it really does allow you to use a lot of the tools that you have in order to deal with him and the things that he has available to deal with you. It's such a good fight. I really love it, and I think it's really well designed back and forth between using a lance and fighting a Rathalos. So next up are stationary monsters, and when I'm thinking stationary, I'm thinking monsters that aren't super comfortable with keeping a gap between you and it. It definitely wants to just stay on top of you the whole time. So I'm thinking something like an Arkfeld, a Jindahad, a new Udra, and then maybe a few others as well, like a new Thuna and things like that. And something I wanted to say about the new Udra in particular, this to me feels like a really good intro to Lance monster to fight. It has a lot of attacks that it wants to stay up close, so it's not like you really need to learn how to close the gap and when it's best to put your weapon away or keep it out and sprint at them or what have you. New Udra is just really going to keep that engagement really fair and honest, just right in your face. And it has a lot of like low damage attacks that it will hit you with repeatedly, whether it's swiping with its tentacle back and forth, smacking them down one at a time, or hitting you with the little tendrils out of its face. Again, it feels like a very honest fight. It's not moving very much. It really gives you that opportunity to learn how to block and how to, essentially parry its attacks. Really fun fight. Again, it's very much a Lance's bread and butter sort of monster. And the same thing goes for like a Jindahad too. He's not moving. That's a big boy. He's standing still. He's blowing, snow and all types of shit at you. Again, another one of those fights where it's bread and butter. And to add to that, and I believe it's called Emity, but we're just going to call it aggro, where you can pull aggro from Jindahad as you could in World. With the big monsters, you can have one person who just kind of, the monster's focusing on specifically. This is, I know I just said new Udra is Lance's bread and butter, but the same thing can be said about Jindahad, if not more, because of the fact that you can pull that aggro, which is exactly where something like a Lance wants to be. It wants to be blocking, it wants to be tanking, it wants to be that wall in between it and the monster and the other hunters that you're fighting with. Now, I showed my build earlier. I used to use a build that was really focused on like guard and like health and defense and things like that, basically being that giant tank. And to be honest, I don't know if the game is ever going to get to the point where that class, where playing the Lance in that specific style is useful. But I will admit, for this particular fight, it felt really good, and it feels like it makes a lot of sense to use there. I'm hoping that opportunity comes up a little bit more in the future with some of the other big monster fights that I'm sure they're going to add. But it's like you fit that archetype perfectly. It's a really, really fun fight. Now to end things off, Arkfeld. Now, as I said earlier, this is one of my top 2 fights when it comes to using a Lance. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that I just feel like I've mastered the fight at this point. I'm like so good at being able to just not get hit. I don't think the Arkfeld fight I'm going to show on screen is me not getting hit, but there have been numerous times where I'm doing no hit runs, or if I am getting hit, I'm only getting hit once or twice. I'm never having to heal or cart or anything like that. Again, Arkfeld's attacks feel very honest, and that to me, honestly, first of all, is to its detriment, right? I feel like Monster Hunter has always had like questionable hitboxes for some monsters. If anybody remembers the Plesioth back in the day, its hip checks, that thing, I mean, it would hip check the world, right? Like it was just the most ridiculous ability in the game. But regardless, something like an Arkfeld is the polar opposite. If you see its explosion, it is strictly in that little spot that it's starting up on. And stuff like that is perfect, honestly, for a lot of classes. To be completely fair, there's nothing super specific to a Lance, but it feels really good for a Lance because it allows you to get those greedy hits in, which is what I was talking about earlier, where it feels really gratifying to understand a fight very well and being able to weave that in as appropriate. This guy is super easy to do it with. I think if New Udra is like an introduction to Lance, a Arkfeld is basically like the mastery of a Lance. It feels really, really fun. And then if you want like a masochist challenge, that's when you go fight like a Rathalos. Yeah, I mean, using the Lance against it, this is where counter thrust becomes super impactful. With most monsters, you can kind of just use whatever you want, and it's really no big of a deal. It's not that big of a deal, rather. But something like an Arkfeld, you pretty much almost always want to be chaining your attacks into a counter thrust to make sure that you're never going to get hit by what is otherwise some really like beefy attacks, because it's not often that it gives you much time to think about what you're doing. The same can be said about a Rathalos as well. The same can be said about a New Udra, and especially like a Gore Magala. These fights, you're almost always chaining into counter thrust, whereas some of these other guys, you can get away with being a little bit greedier, a little bit easier. They're easier to kind of like stagger. They're easier to play the fights however you want. Again, something like an Arkfeld, Gore Magala, things like that. Counter thrust is peak, and it is like one of the best ways to deal with these monsters, giving you that ability to be really offensive and then pivot into a, you know, quote unquote defensive kind of take that then leads you into more damage, right? Like it's super fun. Really great dynamics back and forth, and hopefully what you're seeing on screen is a good example of all of that. Just kind of getting greedy hits in, getting those counter thrusts in, things like that. But yeah, I mean, that's pretty much my thoughts on kind of fighting a variety of monsters and things like that. Lance, super fun class to play. I would urge anybody who hasn't really given it an honest shake, go out there and do so. This is a super engaging class and a very rewarding and gratifying one on top of that. But with all that said, I hope you guys have enjoyed the video. The next one I intend on doing is a dual blades video. Again, another weapon who I've just never really touched in the past. I've toyed around with it quite a bit because I love like the idea of it. And especially now in this game with like the very anime-esque kind of style that it has, I definitely have been having a lot of fun with it on the side here, and we'll be diving into it a little bit more. And then from there, pivoting into, again, some of the other weapons that I really haven't touched very much, eventually ending on the ones that I've, you know, kind of grown to understand very well over the, you know, the past decade plus that I've been playing these games. But yeah, keep an eye out for the Dual Blades video and subscribe if you guys want to catch that. But I love you guys, and I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Catch you next time.